So, the only way that I can predict how long this video is going to be is when it's done, because I have no idea. This one could be lengthy, so we'll see how it goes. We'll see where we're at in a little while. As the title says, I am reviewing The Irishman. Now, this is the Criterion release of The Irishman. It's absolutely beautiful. Martin Scorsese's mafia baby, pretty much, after directing 3 masterpieces. Well, more than that, but I mean mafia movies. Mean Streets, Casino, Goodfellas, and The Irishman. And The Irishman came out on Netflix originally in 2019, and it's great. Outside of, almost being a miniseries, pushing 3.5 hours. It's a really good film. They could have even extended it to 4 hours and made it into like either a 2 or 3 part miniseries kind of thing. But yeah, it goes a little bit longer than your average film, and it always keeps, in my opinion, it keeps the audience's attention, and it does what it sets out to do. It's basically like a more epically paced Goodfellas kind of thing. There's a lot of similarities, especially when you start diving into the special features, which I'm going to explain as well. I'm going to start by doing my regular film review, and then I'm going to be talking about the special features as well, because I really dove into this whole package, you could say. So yeah, this has the famous people that have been in Scorsese films for a while. Joe Pesci, who doesn't quite play the villain that he usually plays in this one. He does play a mob boss, but it's a much more tamed mob boss, which is actually a theme in this film, where it's a much more tame kind of mafia movie compared to Scorsese's others. And you got Robert De Niro, obviously. Al Pacino makes an appearance in here. Now, I'll have to do my research and see if Al Pacino has been in a Scorsese film before, but I don't think that he has. Unless he was in The Departed, which I don't think he was. I think this might be Al Pacino's first time working with Scorsese, but don't quote me on that because I might be mistaken. Or just, correct me in the comments and call me a dumbass. I don't know. But yeah, starting with the opening of this film, which critics absolutely adore, with the panning camera shot going through the old age home, it's beautiful. And the song that they chose to put in here, the soundtrack is amazing and so fitting, and the opening track is such a wonderful choice of song, in The Still of the Night by the Five Satins. I love it. It's so good. It's so like 50s mafia sounding. It's great. Don't ask me when the song came out, but probably sometime around the 50s and 60s. And then you get an old Robert De Niro in a wheelchair, and basically the film is him telling him his story about his life. Now, according to Scorsese in the script, this film took place between 1949 and 2000. So there's big age gaps going through the decades with these characters that play out through the whole film. And as anybody knows who knows anything about this film, or the big deal about this film, or one of them, is the de-aging of the actors and making them look like they did in the 90s. And some people are like, oh, that's cheap and cheesy and it doesn't look real at all. And some people think it looks absolutely fantastic. I can't say it's perfect, but I can't say that it also looks flawless, because it's really hard to... Not only are you de-aging the person's looks, but there's still... Some are like 82, I'm pretty sure. Their movements, you can't really fix that, right? Like the way they stand up or sit down, sometimes it's a little slower for somebody who's supposed to be playing like a 49-year-old, for example. And it's just, it is what it is. But Scorsese, as he says in one of the special features, which, I don't know, I feel like I'm jumping ahead already, he didn't want the actors to have those like ball things on their face to use to de-age them, because, like CGI in CGI mode, because he felt that they would get in the way of their performance, and since the actors are very much playing off of each other with the script and their facial expressions and all that, he felt like the golf balls, as he refers them to as he refers to them as, would just get in the way and interrupt the actors' banter, pretty much. So he just wanted to do everything straight CGI in post-production, and it was a company called Industrial Light and Magic that did the whole de-aging process, and they did great for what they were given. I mean, I can't see them doing any better. Back to the film, Robert De Niro's character, Frank Sheeran. This is a true story as well. It's based on a book called I Heard You Paint Houses. So the alternate title for this film is I Heard You Paint Houses. I didn't look up the author, but the book is called I Heard You Paint Houses, and it's based on that. So he's telling a story, Frank Sheeran is, from this old age home. And the film goes back and forth, like I said, between 1949 and 2000. And it begins with Frank and Russell Buffalino, which is Joe Pesci's character. They're taking a road trip with their wives. Connie is Frank's wife, I'm pretty sure. Or Carrie, I think it's Carrie. But anyways, they're going with their two wives on a road trip, and this is kind of a flashback, but it's kind of like plays in the middle of the story, so it's a little weird the way they structured it that way. But they're taking a road trip, and then it flashes back right to the beginning in the 40s, where Russell Buffalino and Frank Sheeran met, Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro's characters. They meet at a gas station because Robert De Niro's character, Frank, is having car troubles, and Russell comes along and basically helps him fix it up, and he's wondering if he owns this gas station slash shop, and it turns out Russell Buffalino owns the whole road. He's this big time, mafioso kind of thing, but he's businessman, you could, quote unquote, refer to him as. And about a month or two later, they meet up again, because Frank is working for a meat company, like basically a beef company, where he is a delivery driver transporting meats from one place to another, or from the butcher shop, you could say, to restaurants or wherever. And he kind of gets involved in a little bit of theft. And he has a lawyer named another Buffalino. He's played by Ray Romano. I loved seeing Ray Romano in this film. Ray Romano, you haven't seen since Everybody Loves Raymond, and he was in Ice Age. He did the voice in Ice Age for one of the characters, and he's here and there, but you don't really get a really in-depth character like you see him in this film. And he does really good as the lawyer. He's hilarious. He plays like this kind of crooked, kind of sarcastic, really good at his job lawyer, and I loved his character for that. And he is Frank's lawyer. Bill Buffalino is his name. He's cousins with Russell Buffalino, and that's how, like, him being Frank's lawyer, that's how Frank reconnected with Russell. And then Russell they start to have more connection with each other because they are both Italian. Or, no, Frank's Irish, sorry. Russell's Italian, but Frank has been involved with Italians, and he knows how to speak Italian and all that. The Irishman, he's Italian, dumbass. Jesus. Frank's Irish, Russell's Italian, and so is Bill, obviously. I mean, Ray Romano, I'm pretty sure he's Italian in real life, but he certainly looks it. So they get tight, and Russell brings Frank into his world, and you get, a bunch of things going down. There's a point where a guy tries to get Frank to do a hit on a Jewish laundromat, and it turns out this Jewish laundromat is partially owned by a guy named Angelo, who works with Russell and is a very big person in the mafia world that Russell's involved in. So, you know, attempting to make a hit on this laundromat was a huge no-no and a huge mistake on Frank's part, but an even bigger mistake on the guy who tried to get Frank to do it, therefore leading to his inevitable demise because he's an idiot. He fucks with the wrong people. You don't fuck with the wrong people. So the confrontation between Angelo and Frank is really well written. It's one of the best scenes in the film. It's one of those scenes that you can kind of compare to the one in Goodfellas where it's like, how am I funny? How the fuck are you funny? Not as intense, but you got some of that same intensity where you're kind of like just staring, like what is gonna happen? Like this is gonna end badly, but then everything ends up being okay. So I liked that scene for what it was and the way it was written and the way it was directed. It was really well done. Harvey Keitel, who plays Angelo, is really good in his role as well as Angelo. So it's funny how after every hit, there's a river where they are, where all the guns are thrown because no weapon, no crime, right? But there's a one scene where Frank is like, there's enough guns in this river to basically start a small war because of how many criminals throw their guns there. It's like, how would that not be easy to find if there's that many guns and they're all being thrown in the same place? Like, the FBI and the police don't send divers around. Like, if they're searching for a murder weapon, don't you think that they would like look in the river? It's really funny how this river and this one particular spot of the river is where all the criminals throw their guns and they're never found. I just found that crazy. Maybe that's common in real life, but I think that would be a pretty high place to look for a murder weapon, in my opinion. But I guess not in this world, and it's a true story. So, I also found it weird how Frank leaves his wife for a waitress that he didn't know that long. She served him a few times, and then he just left his wife for her, and she became his like long-term future wife. That was interesting. And then Russell kind of pulls Frank away from this meat delivery service, and Frank obviously starts doing more hits and joining the mafia world as the Irishman. And he kind of builds himself from there. And then the next big character outside of Russell that Frank ends up meeting is this guy named Jimmy Hoffa. And Jimmy Hoffa is like the star of this whole story next to the Irishman, Frank Sheeran. Jimmy Hoffa was a real guy. Like, this whole story is basically based on his rise and fall. And Al Pacino kills it. Again, Al Pacino is, if he's not 80, he's at least in his high 70s. But I'm pretty sure he's hit 80 already. And he's also de-aged. He looks exactly like he did in Scent of a Woman in 1993, I think. Or 1992, 1991 maybe even. But he looks exactly like he did in that film. They did a good job on his de-aging for sure. And then Jimmy Hoffa and Frank also form this bond that takes them through all kinds of places and journeys. They introduce a story connected to JFK, John F. Kennedy, the president who was shot, and they intertwine that with the mob and how the mob probably had connections in that. I don't know the history of it. I have not read I Heard You Paint Houses, and I have not studied the kind of history of that or what went on between JFK and the mob. Like, I don't know anything about that outside of this film. So, but it is really connected, and Jimmy Hoffa really did not get along with JFK and did not like the person, did not like his whole family, his father, anybody in the JFK family, Jimmy Hoffa had nothing to do with. And Russell, it tells the story of how Russell kind of helped JFK become president. So Russell and Jimmy Hoffa had that huge difference between Russell helping JFK and supporting him, and Jimmy Hoffa wanting nothing to do with him. So there's that. Like I said, the whole second act, or a big part of the second act, dives into that story. Um, I have to mention the watermelon scene. Um, Jimmy Hoffa doesn't drink, and Frank and this other guy are having a meeting with Jimmy Hoffa, and he doesn't drink, and he doesn't allow anybody to drink around him because he hates alcohol. And they want to find a way to drink, and they know that Jimmy Hoffa hates watermelon and will not touch watermelon, so they spike a watermelon full of vodka and they get wasted off vodka watermelon in front of Jimmy Hoffa, knowing that he's not going to touch the watermelon. That is the funniest scene in the film. The funniest scene I've seen in a lot of films, and like that I can remember, and so genius. So genius. I laughed so hard the first time I watched this film, and when I saw that scene, when that scene came up. I'm like, man, that made me laugh. The court scene with Hoffa involving JFK, it's intense, and again, it's very well written. Um, Jimmy Hoffa at one point ends up going to jail for fraud. And there's another character introduced. His name is Tony Pro. Yeah, Tony Pro. He's played by, I don't know if I wrote his name down, but he's played by a British guy. And this British guy is interpreting like an Italian-American accent and does a really good job at it, in my opinion. But yeah, Tony Pro and Jimmy Hoffa, geez, their banter back and forth, they hate each other. There's a scene where Tony Pro is supposed to have a meeting with Joe Hoffa, and he comes in shorts and like a Hawaiian shirt, and Jimmy Hoffa's just like giving it to him, ripping him apart. Like, why would you show up with shorts and and a shirt and not a suit? And just the way they talk back and forth, like they're always at it. They're always at each other's throats. It's so funny, and it's so well written, and so just fun to watch. Like, there's so many. This film is so well paced for a film at the length that it is, that it's always entertaining through the whole thing. It doesn't really miss a beat. Like, there's no parts that really drag, in my opinion. And I find that this film could be 3 hours long, but they added the last half hour to really show the aging part and the life of a mobster if they're not shot dead, like the retirement era of a mobster and what that's like. And that's the whole point of The Irishman, is like showing the later years of what it's like to kind of retire as a mafioso, and what life is like being, having that history, how many people you've lost, whether it's to death or whether it's to anger, family loss, and all that. It's really, really powerful stuff, and I definitely want to read the book, by the way. There's a Christmas scene that's nice. Frank's daughter, Peggy, right? Peggy. Um, always, she always has like a very big uncomfortableness to Russell for some reason. She just always finds Russell like just weird. Like, she never really likes him, but she at the same time finds this really big bond to Jimmy Hoffa. Like, as a little girl, she's like 12 or something. Um, and she always like warms up to Jimmy Hoffa, and Jimmy Hoffa's buying her ice cream and all that. But Russell, she just never has any of him. And Russell's always like, she's always like avoiding me. I don't know what the problem is. And he gives her some money for Christmas, and she's just like, she doesn't really want to say thank you, and she's awkward and all that. So yeah, there's and it shows her obviously as an adult too. Anna Paquin plays the older version of Peggy, and she does okay. It doesn't. I had to, like, I didn't know it was Anna Paquin actually. I saw her in the cast, and then I'm like, oh shit, that's Anna Paquin, but it didn't really look like her too much. They made her look more like 70s looking, like 1970, not 70 years old, 1970. Um, There's a scene where a guy gets chewed up in a tree shredder. That's pretty brutal. You don't get like a whole bunch of brutal scenes in this one because, like I said, this one's more like tame and showing like the backgrounds of the mafia instead of the forefronts where like Goodfellas and Casino where everybody shoots everybody. It's not as violent as that. It's more mellow mafia kind of thing. As Peggy grows up, she's very against what her dad does, and she's sick of seeing her dad on the news. And she knows, when somebody gets murdered, that her dad obviously had something to do with it. And at the point, at the end where Jimmy Hoffa finally meets his demise, obviously from the hands of Frank, when Russell tells him that because of what Jimmy Hoffa did, it's nobody's fault, but he has to be taken out. And unfortunately, Frank would had to be the one to do it. Now, why Frank? There's not really a big reason, but like Russell said, it is what it is. Like, why couldn't Russell do it himself? I don't know. Like why did he have to ask Frank to do it? I don't know. Frank was dreading doing something like that because of the bond that he formed with Jimmy, and and him being Catholic too, which I don't know. He had no problem killing anyone else being Catholic. So I don't know if the Catholic thing had anything to do with it. But in one of the special features, Scorsese mentions him being Catholic, and that's why he had a problem murdering Jimmy Hoffa. But like I said, he's already done the deed many other times. So I like how Russell gives Frank a ring that only like 2 other people have. So there's 3 rings and only 2 other people have the other 2, and then he gives this ring to Frank. And it's like this giant, beautiful, like meaningful ring. So like you could tell that that's something special to be given to somebody. So Russell really, really admires Frank for what he is, and you can tell that Frank is someone special to Russell for sure. And then going back to the murder of Jimmy Hoffa, Frank flies out, and it's a very, very spread out kind of scene and slow, and like Frank has to take Jimmy Hoffa to this house. I don't know if it's an abandoned house, but they obviously use this house to set as this place where Jimmy Hoffa is going to be assassinated. And I heard you paint houses, means paint houses with blood. It's a code word. So, not Russell. Jimmy Hoffa's son, Chucky, is played by Jesse Plemons. And I have to say, Jesse Plemons is a great actor. There's nothing wrong with him. But after seeing him in Breaking Bad, Jesus, do I not like the guy. Because of how freaking awful he is in Breaking Bad as a character. Like, his character's evil. His character's walking evil. He's the carnation of evil in human form in Breaking Bad. I couldn't stand him in Breaking Bad. And he's carried that. Just looking at him, I'm always constantly reminded of Breaking Bad. And I'm just like, oh my god, I can't with this guy's he's so evil in that show. I can't even deal with him in anything else. But he doesn't have too much dialogue in this film. But I just found it so funny on that car ride where they're taking with Sally and Frank and to pick up Jimmy Hoffa. And Sally and Chucky's banter about a fish in the back seat is, again, one of the funniest scenes. Definitely funnier than the watermelon scene. I was talking about the watermelon scene, and I found that I said it was the funniest scene in this film. No, the fish scene. Because Sally's like trying to ask him what kind of fish he bought, and Chucky doesn't know, and it's this whole almost Tarantino-esque conversation about one irrelevant thing that goes on for like 2-3 minutes, and it's about a fish, and it's the seat in the back is wet because this fish was defrosting, and oh my god, it's just, if I could recite the dialogue I would, but I can't. You're just gonna have to, like, if you've seen the film, I'm sure you've seen the film. This is a whole spoiler review. You know what scene I'm talking about. So, and you know how funny it is. You know how funny it is. But yeah, the car ride is just awkward because you know what's gonna happen, and it's just tough. And then there's the whole true story of how Jimmy Hoffa's body was never found and there was never any proof of his death. He literally just disappeared, which is weird because he was assassinated in this house, and the gun was put right on top of his body. So he was taken to be cremated by some other mafia guys. They just basically took his body, put him in a box, and burnt him. But the gun, it was right there. Like, nobody heard the shot, I'm assuming. They must have really set this up to be very private and exclusive. Like, the house must have been soundproof or something. But just him not throwing the gun away, but just leaving the gun right on top of Hoffa's body was kind of dangerous in trying to not get caught. You know what I mean? So I wondered about that, but that happens at about the 3 hour mark, and like I said, the last half hour is just Frank aging with Russell and them ending up in jail because they both ended up in jail, and then Russell dies before Frank. Frank is alive at the credits, but he's in his 80s at this point. You could tell he's not going to live much longer, and the quiet story, the subtle story of a mafia aftermath is what I love about this film and what this film is kind of famous for. And that's why it's kind of Scorsese's baby, because he's a master mafia movie maker, which he surprisingly only has 4, including this one. Excuse me. He has lots of other films, but the ones that are directly like mafia related he has 4, including this one, which I mentioned at the beginning: Mean Streets, Goodfellas, Casino, Irishman. And then a bunch of journalists are trying to get the story out of Frank, and Frank still is keeping quiet, silent, and the journalists are like, why? Like, everybody you knew is dead. Russell, Angelo, Sally, everybody. They're gone. There's no case to be made anymore. Like, why don't you just tell your story? And he wouldn't. I guess he eventually did, but he wasn't having it yet. And the grape juice scene, I don't know how you would be able to dip bread in grape juice and have it be the same as wine. I can't see how grape juice would even remind you of wine, because it's friggin' like whatever brand, like sweet grape juice. Like, really, they're trying to remember what it was like to have like bread and wine. I don't know if grape juice kind of is a good substitute, but hey, I guess if it works for them, it is what it is. And then Frank, there's a scene where he's buying his own casket, which I find a little sad. But yeah, and he wanted a crypt where, like, not underground, but those crypts that are put in cement with the name and the birth year and death year and all that. So he got himself one of those. But he basically ended up alone at the end of his life, which is very unfortunate. He's telling all his sins to a priest at one point, and the priest is kind of always giving him his blessing, and he still is Catholic, even though he committed all these sins in his life. And then, I like they play the Five Satins in the Still of the Night again at the end of the film, which is great. I love that song. It's very fitting. All the music is great, but that song is a perfect choice for the beginning and the end of the film. And I like in the final scene, when the priest is about to leave the room, he says for the priest to just leave the door ajar and leave it like a bit open, because he likes it like that. From my interpretation of that, like, I kind of could relate to why he did that, because first of all, he's so isolated in his life, and he's pretty much lost everybody that he's ever known through death or through anger, like I said. But not only that, because he's aging so much, in case anything happens to him, he wants to be found. I don't, like, I can kind of relate to that. Like, if I was sick or something, I would not want to be alone just in case anything happened to me. Like, I would always want to be able to have somebody be able to find me if I was ever in any medical danger or something like that. And when you said that, I'm like, yeah, I totally can see like where he's coming from at his age and being in his situation, like wanting the door to be just a little bit open just in case, somebody can find him if the worst were to happen, you know what I mean? So I definitely related to that. That's the film, The Irishman. So we're at a half an hour. Let's run through these special features. It's a Criterion release, so they're loaded. Making The Irishman. It's about 37 minutes, and you get interviews with Scorsese and a lot of the actors. Charles Brandt, there you go, I wrote the author's name down. Charles Brandt is the author of I Heard You Paint Houses. This film did remind me of some films that I totally forgot that Scorsese directed. I was reminded of The Departed. I forgot that he directed that. I totally forgot that he directed The Wolf of Wall Street. Very strange. I forgot, it's like, not that I forgot, because I know he directed these films, but it just slipped my mind. Raging Bull's another one. Like, I've always known Raging Bull, and I'm like, Scorsese directed that too. Son of a bitch. He directed so much, and he has such a big library of films, and this film, in a lot of scenes, there's a lot of touches and flares that kind of remind you of his filmography. Like I said, Anna Paquin plays older Peggy, adult Peggy, and she's kind of unrecognizable in this film, but she does a good job. Stephen Graham is Tony Pro, the British guy who portrays an Italian-American accent perfectly. The making of this film, they needed to shoot it a certain way in order to de-age and have the facial CGI fixing to make them look younger. So they needed special kinds of cameras, and they used infrared cameras, and they used 2 infrared cameras, which they also call witness cameras, on either side of the director's camera, like the main one. So there's 3 cameras filming all the actors at the same time, plus all the other cameras shooting at different angles and all that. So there was a lot of cameras that went into this production, and a lot of lenses on said cameras that went into this production. It's a big one. Color corrections were used for different decades, and I took notice of that throughout the film, but when it was mentioned, I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea, and they started explaining what colors they wanted for each decade to represent the mood of that decade and whatnot. A lot of attention to detail in this film. They actually used phones from the 50s, and the actors, some of them, when they would pick up the phones, because there's scenes where they have to pick up the phone and carry the phone with them with the wire and everything, they said they were so surprised at how heavy the phones were, and Scorsese was laughing because some of the actors were born after the 50s, and he's like, yeah, phones were heavy and phones were loud, and he even mentions phone calls were a statement, because they were, when somebody called you, it was a statement when somebody called. I don't know when my camera's going to die, but it might soon. Sebastian Maniscalco plays Crazy Joe, which he's a comedian, and I've always known him as a comedian. Then there's Anatomy of a Scene, where they really dissect the scene at the Latin Casino, which is a big scene in the film. This is where Jimmy Hoffa, this is where everybody, like Russell and Frank, start to tell Jimmy Hoffa that he's in a bit of trouble with a lot of people, and for him to kind of step back. But Jimmy Hoffa lets his ego take control, and just that's why he ends up having to be assassinated at the end, because his ego is just blown through the roof, and he thinks he's like, if anybody fucks with him, they're gonna be immediately assassinated. So he doesn't listen to anybody, basically. And there's this whole scene. This all takes place slowly at this Latin casino. There's a roundtable discussion involving De Niro, Scorsese, Joe Pesci, and Al Pacino. and that's cool. They start to discuss a lot of their experiences, kind of thing, on the film. That's fun to see, and it's not too long. None of the special features are overly long where they're going to bore you. They're a good length. They talk about rehearsals. They talk about, no matter how many films they do, everything's a learning experience. So I like that. There's a video essay called "Gangster's Requiem" by a critic named Farron Smith Nemi, which is a woman, Farron. Yeah. And she just goes through the whole themes of the film: the aging side of the mob, the end of a mobster, who hasn't been assassinated, because so many of the mobsters in this film have been assassinated throughout the film. And a lot of them actually in 1980. I guess 1980 was like the year where everybody was gunned down and like assassinated here, there, and everywhere. But, if you're lucky enough to not get hit, you die in old age. And sometimes that can be worse in a lot of ways. There's a lot of cons to that too, and they really explore that in this film. She discusses the politics. She discusses the non-intimidating Russell, played by Joe Pesci, because he's always playing like a very hot-headed, very mean, very bad mafioso, like who'll like rip anybody apart. And this one, he's a lot more tame. So that was different for his character in a Scorsese film. And she discusses, which is really interesting, a scene between Ray Liotta and Paulie in Goodfellas. That, because Ray Liotta basically thinks he's invincible, and Paulie's like, yo, calm down. You have no idea what it's like to age in the mafia. And that kind of translates to the entire theme of this film. And then lastly, you have the evolution of digital aging, where the company Industrial Light and Magic explains how they did all the CGI and all that, and you meet the people in the company and all that. And lastly, you get two interviews with the actual Jimmy Hoffa and the actual Frank Sheeran. Now, I watched the interview with Frank Sheeran, not the one with Jimmy Hoffa. The one with Frank Sheeran is fantastic. The real Frank Sheeran. He tells a story in like 6 minutes that's like capturing. It's crazy. Like you can tell he's a man with like a huge history, and you can tell he can talk for hours. Like in 6 minutes, the story he tells is incredible. So I really liked watching his. I will have to watch Jimmy Hoffa's interview as well, which was recorded in 1969. Frank Sheeran's was recorded in 1999. Excuse me. And Jimmy Hoffa's is longer. I think it's like 18 minutes, where Frank's was like 6 minutes. But that's the special features, and that's The Irishman from the Criterion. I suggest picking it up. I'm not going to make this go any longer. Subscribe to Morgan Film Fan if you like to listen to my voice, or if you like my film reviews, and I'll be back with plenty more. Check out my other ones. This is my first... Is it my first Criterion review? I don't know. But it's my first official Criterion review. So yeah. Morgan Film Fan, subscribe. I will be back for more. Have a good one. Cheers.